I went into my husband's car to tidy up, and I found a tube of personal lubricant tucked away in the glove box. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it. I just quietly went into my garage, found a tube of industrial-grade superglue, and made a simple switch. And the aftermath of that simple switch, well, it ended with the entire neighborhood gathered on their lawns to watch the fire department break down my front door. Not for a fire, but for a situation that was, well, a whole lot stickier. I'm so glad you've come to hear my story. If you're here with me now, please take a moment to press the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss what happens next. And please, do tell me in the comments where you're listening from. My little bakery here in Savannah can feel like its own small world, and I would surely love to know how far my story of a woman's revenge has traveled. Number 1. The Sirens and the Silence. My name is Martha Brooks. I am 63 years old. I have lived my whole life here in Savannah, Georgia, where the air is as thick and sweet as the tea we drink. For 40 of those years, I have been a baker, a wife, a mother. I thought I knew the shape of my life, the familiar weight of it in my hands, like a well-worked piece of dough. But one night showed me I knew nothing at all. From my neighbor's window, I watched my son, Marcus, lead his team of firefighters into my home, the home I built, not with bricks and mortar, but with 40 years of waking before the dawn, of kneading and rising, of filling its rooms with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of my son's laughter. The red and blue lights of the fire engine pulsed across the street, painting frantic stripes on the calm face of Mrs. Peterson's house, where I sat. She had a cup of chamomile tea waiting for me on the table. It was untouched. My hands rested in my lap, one folded over the other, perfectly still. I knew they wouldn't find a fire. There was no smoke, no heat. There was only a quiet rot that had been spreading through the foundations of my house for months, for years. A rot I had finally decided to expose. I knew what they would find. They would find my husband of 40 years, Samuel, glued to my son's wife. My son, my Marcus, had to walk in and see that. He led his men through the front door that he and I had painted a bright, hopeful yellow just last spring. I heard the splintering crack of the wood as they forced it open. It was a sound of finality, a clean break. The neighbors were out on their lawns, of course, drawn by the siren's song. They whispered, their hands covering their mouths, their faces etched with a delicious kind of concern. They pointed their phones, eager to capture the spectacle. My spectacle. It is lookable rated before that. Why? I just watched. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch in my throat. I felt a profound and terrible quiet inside me. A silence that matched the one that had been growing in my home for so long. The paramedics brought them out on a single stretcher. A clumsy, tangled mess hidden beneath a thin white sheet. The shame was a living thing, radiating from them in waves. I could feel it, even from across the street. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren began to wail again, carrying them away into the humid Georgia night. And I sat there, in the pulsing blue and red light, and I let my mind drift back to before the sirens, before the glue, back to the beginning of the end. It started 3 weeks ago. On a Tuesday, Samuel came home from what he called a business trip to Augusta. He walked in, dropped his briefcase by the door with a heavy sigh, the way he always did. A performance of exhaustion. He loosened his tie, a gesture meant to signal a long, hard day of work. But something was different. It was his smell. For 40 years, Samuel had smelled of the same things. Old Spice deodorant, the faint scent of paper from his office, and the ivory soap I always bought. A simple, predictable scent. The scent of my husband. But that night, another fragrance clung to him. It was a sweet, floral perfume, something cheap and loud. It was an alien scent in my home. An intruder. He mumbled that he was tired and went straight upstairs. I heard the familiar groan of our mattress as he collapsed onto it. He didn't even bother to shower. The alien scent lingered in the air, a ghost of his betrayal. Later, as I gathered his clothes for the laundry, my fingers brushed against a piece of paper in his trouser pocket. It was a receipt, crisp and new, from a fancy steakhouse in Charleston, not Augusta, dated for that very night. Charleston. He had told me he was in Augusta, 150 miles away, but he had been here, close by. So close. The receipt was for a party of 2. An expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the kind he only bought for special occasions. 2 main courses. 1 steak, his favorite. The other, seafood pasta. I stood there in the quiet of our laundry room, the receipt trembling in my hand. I tried to remember the last time he had taken me to a place like that. For our anniversary, for my birthday, the memories were faded, distant. They felt like they belonged to someone else's life. A small, bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound I didn't recognize. This man, my husband, was living a different life. A life with expensive wine and seafood, pasta and sweet, cheap perfume. A life that did not include me. The silence in the house pressed in on me. It was no longer a comfortable silence, born of years of shared understanding. It was a heavy silence, an accusatory silence, filled with the things we no longer said to each other. And in that quiet, holding that small piece of paper, I felt the first crack appear in the foundation of the life I had so carefully built. It was a tiny fracture, almost invisible, but I just knew, that it was the beginning of the end, and the whole house was about to come crashing down. Number 2, the glove box and the truth. It all started, as most endings do, with a quiet unraveling. It wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow, creeping fog of doubt that began to settle over our house a few weeks before the Sirens. Robert, he had become a stranger. We had shared a bed for 4 decades. But lately, he seemed to be miles away. Even when he was sitting right next to me, he had taken on more consulting trips, he said. Short trips, just a day or two, to Atlanta, Charlotte. Places close enough not to seem suspicious. He'd come home smelling different, not of perfume, nothing so obvious. It was the scent of expensive hotel soap, the kind with lemongrass and verbena. It was a clean smell, but it wasn't the smell of our home. It wasn't the Irish Spring soap he'd used for 30 years. Then there were the receipts. Little folded squares of paper I'd find in his coat pockets while doing the laundry. Dinners for 2 at restaurants I'd only read about in magazines. A bottle of wine that cost more than our weekly groceries. I'd smooth them out on the ironing board, the heat from the iron pressing the creases flat. And I would try to make it make sense. Maybe he was entertaining a client. That's what he told me once. When I asked, just business. Evelyn, he'd said, not looking at me. It's what you have to do these days. And I, a fool, had chosen to believe him. Because believing him was easier than facing the alternative. It was easier than admitting that the foundation of my life, the very ground beneath my feet, was starting to crack. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was a sweltering South Carolina afternoon. The air so thick you could taste it. Robert had taken my car that morning, said his was low on gas. He left it parked haphazardly in the driveway when he returned. The front wheel halfway on my flower bed. I went out to move it, the heat of the black leather seat stinging the back of my legs. The car felt different. The passenger seat was pushed back much farther than I ever kept it. A long-legged person had been sitting there. I sighed and started to tidy up. It's a habit of mine. I can't stand clutter. I picked up an empty water bottle from the floor, a crumpled napkin from the cup holder. Then, I opened the glove box to put away the gas receipts. My fingers brushed against something smooth, plastic, and slippery. I frowned. I pulled it out. It was a small, white tube, half used. The cap was slightly loose, and a little bit of the clear, slick gel had oozed out around the rim. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It was a tube of personal lubricant. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a cold wave wash over me. Despite the suffocating heat, it wasn't mine. In 40 years of marriage, through all the ups and downs, the good years and the lean ones, it had never been ours. My first instinct was to throw it, to hurl it out the window, watch it skitter across the hot asphalt, and pretend I had never seen it. But I didn't. My hand, the one that had held my son's for the first time, the one that had kneaded thousands of pounds of dough, simply trembled. This was not for me. This was for someone else. The name of that someone else was a question that hung in the air, silent and terrifying. I carefully, methodically, put the tube back. I tucked it behind the car's manual, exactly where I'd found it. I closed the glove box with a soft click. I wiped my hands on my apron, scrubbing them raw, as if I could wipe away the filth of the discovery. My movements were robotic. My heart was a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs. But on the outside, I was calm. A strange, chilling calm. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside Robert, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and I felt nothing. The love, the companionship, the history, it had all evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I was being played for a fool. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a man my cousin had once mentioned in a hushed, embarrassed tone. A private investigator. His name was Mr. Davies. We met in a small, dimly lit coffee shop downtown. It was the kind of place that smelled of stale coffee and secrets. He was a small man, unremarkable in every way, which I suppose was the point of his profession. He wore a rumpled suit and had tired, knowing eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid out the facts, the trips, the receipts, the strange scent on his clothes. I did not mention the tube in the glove box. Some things are too shameful to say out loud. I told him Robert was meeting a client that very evening, at the Palmetto Grill, one of the fanciest places in town. I just need to know the truth, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. Whatever it is, Mr. Davies just nodded. He wrote a few things down in a small notebook, took the check I slid across the table, and said he would be in touch. I went home and started a batch of sourdough. I worked the dough, pushing and folding. The familiar rhythm, a small comfort in a world that was tilting off its axis. I tried to lose myself in the work. I tried not to think. Around 9 o'clock that night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone into the flour. I opened it. There was only a picture. No words. Just a picture. It was taken from a distance. Slightly blurry, but clear enough. It was Robert, sitting in a secluded booth at the Palmetto Grill. A single candle flickered between them. He was smiling. A wide, genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. He was leaning forward, his hand covering the hand of the person sitting across from him. And that person was leaning forward too. To her long, manicured fingers intertwined with my husband's. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her blonde hair catching the light. It was Jessica, my son's wife. The world didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It just went quiet. A deep, cold quiet that filled my ears, my head, my soul. I stood there in my warm, sweet-smelling kitchen, a place of comfort and creation, and all I could feel was the icy grip of betrayal. It was a cold so profound, so absolute. I felt sure I would never be warm again. I stared at the picture, at my husband, at my daughter-in-law. The anger I expected to feel wasn't there. Not yet. All that was left was a hollow space, a vast, empty cavern where my heart used to be. And in that cavern, a single, cold thought began to form. A thought that was as sharp and clear as a shard of ice. They would not get away with this. Number 3, the whisper and the plan. For 2 days, I lived in that cold, quiet space. I moved through my life like a ghost. I baked the bread. I frosted the cakes. I smiled at my customers. I sat across from Robert at the dinner table and listened to him talk about his day, about the weather, about nothing at all. And all the while, that picture was burned into the back of my mind. The image of his hand on hers. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought the betrayal was just about the heart, about the body. I was so naive. On the 3rd day, Mr. Davies sent me another message. It wasn't a picture this time. It was an audio file. Just a small black icon on my screen. The message above it was simple. From the hotel parking lot last night, you need to hear this. I waited until Robert left for his morning walk. I sat down at my kitchen table. The same table where I had helped my son with his homework. The same table where I had planned my bakery menus for 30 years. My hands were trembling again. I put in my earbuds, the little white buds feeling cold against my skin. And I pressed play. There was the sound of car doors closing, the distant rumble of traffic. Then, her voice, Jessica's voice. It was light and breathy, but underneath it was a layer of steel I had never heard before. You have to push him harder on those papers. Rob, she said. The nickname, Rob, felt like a slap. I had never called him Rob. The old woman isn't going to just sign over the bakery. She's smarter than she looks. The old woman, the words echoed in my ears. The old woman, that's what I was to her. Not Evelyn, not her mother-in-law. Just an obstacle, an old woman. Then, his voice, my husband's voice. It was smooth, reassuring. The same voice he had used to calm me down after a nightmare. At the same voice he had used to read our son bedtime stories. Don't you worry about Evelyn, he said, a low chuckle in his throat. She trusts me. She's always trusted me. I'm handling her. By the time she figures anything out, your name will be on every single one of those sweet little shops. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was so intense I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling. This wasn't just about an affair. This wasn't just about stolen nights in a hotel. This was about my life's work. My bakery. Martha's sweet soul. I had started it with nothing but a second-hand oven and a family recipe for pecan pie. I had built it, piece by piece, into something that was mine. Something I was going to leave for my son, and they were planning to take it. To steal it from me. From right under my nose. Using my own trust as a weapon against me. I listened to the rest of it. I made myself listen. I listened to them laugh. I listened to them kiss. The sound wet and obscene in my ears. I listened as they planned to dissolve my son's marriage once the business was secure, leaving him with nothing. When the recording ended, there was only silence. I took the earbuds out. My whole body was shaking now. An uncontrollable tremor that started in my bones. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tears come, hot. Silent tears that ran down my face and dripped onto the worn wood of the kitchen table. I was not just a wronged wife. I was a target. They were not just cheating. They were conspiring, and I was about to lose everything. Everything. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. An hour? Maybe 2. The sun moved across the sky, and the kitchen grew warmer. But I was still frozen in that icy despair. I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't face this monster by myself. There was only one person in the world I could turn to. One person whose heart was as entangled in this mess as my own. My son. I picked up the phone and called him. James? I said, my voice a broken whisper. Can you come over? I need you. He was there in 20 minutes. He came in through the back door, still in his station uniform, his face full of concern. Mom, what's wrong? You sound terrible. I couldn't speak. I couldn't form the words. The betrayal was a physical thing. A toxic lump lodged in my throat, so I just held out my phone to him. I opened the message from Mr. Davies. First, I showed him the picture. I watched his face. I saw the love and concern for me shift into confusion. Then, as his brain recognized the two people in the photograph, I saw the confusion curdle into disbelief. His brow furrowed. His knuckles turned white where he gripped the phone. What is this? He asked. His voice low. I didn't answer. I just tapped the screen and opened the audio file. I took a step back as he raised the phone to his ear, and I watched my son break. It wasn't a loud, dramatic thing. It was a quiet, devastating collapse. The strength seemed to drain out of him, his broad shoulders slumping. The color drained from his face, leaving his dark skin ashen. His eyes, his kind, beautiful eyes, became wide with a horror so profound it stole the breath from my lungs. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, listening to his father and his wife plot the destruction of his mother and himself. He didn't cry. He just broke. I saw the light go out in my son's eyes. He lowered the phone, his hand falling to his side as if it suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. He stared at nothing, his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. The hero, the fire captain, the strong man I had raised, was gone. In his place was a shattered boy. I watched my strong, brave son crumble before my eyes. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't do this alone. Have you ever had to share a terrible truth with someone you love, knowing it would break them? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. Number 4. The son's complicity. I watched my son break. I saw the light go out in his eyes. And I felt a pain deeper than any betrayal. A mother's pain. It's a category all its own. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, at the digital proof of our ruin. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. He didn't sob. He didn't rage. He just emptied. I thought, this is it. This is the moment we fall apart. But I was wrong. My son is a firefighter. He runs into burning buildings when everyone else is running out. He is made of something stronger than just flesh and bone. He is made of my strength. And his father's, well, he is made of my strength. He finally looked up from the phone, his eyes meeting mine. The emptiness was gone. In its place was something new, something hard and cold, something that looked like resolve. He pushed the phone back across the table to me. His hand was steady, rock steady. He said, "Mom, tears won't save your bakery." Just like that. No questions about how long I'd known. No agonizing over the details. He saw the end game. He saw the threat. They weren't just breaking our hearts, they were coming for the work of my hands. My legacy. The business that was supposed to be his one day. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the heavy air in the kitchen. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision. I took a shaky breath. I told him everything then. I told him about the steakhouse receipt, the sweet, cheap perfume, and then, my voice dropping to a near whisper, I told him about the tube I found in the glove box, the sticky, damning proof of their intimacy. As I spoke, I watched his face. It was a mask, the calm, professional mask of a fire captain assessing a dangerous scene. He was cataloging the facts, calculating the risks, formulating a plan of action. The hurt was still there, deep in his eyes, but it was being forged into something else, something sharp. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time. He just stood up, walked to the back door, and went out into the garage. I heard him rummaging around in the old metal toolbox, the one his grandfather had left him. The clinking and scraping of tools sounded loud in the quiet house. He came back a minute later. In his hand, he was holding a small, white and red tube. He set it on the kitchen table between us. It was Krazy glue, the industrial kind, the kind you use to fix a broken chair leg so it will never, ever break again. I stared at the tube. I didn't understand. Marcus looked me straight in the eye. His voice was low. Even if you're going to do it right. He tapped the tube with his finger. This stuff, it doesn't let go. A cold chill went down my spine. It wasn't a chill of fear. It was a chill of recognition. I saw in my son the same steel that was hardening in my own soul. We were not victims. We were survivors. And survivors, sometimes. Survivors have to fight back with the tools they are given. In that moment, we became partners. A silent pact was formed across that kitchen table. We were no longer just mother and son. We were allies. A two-person army against the traitors in our home. The plan began to form. Not in words, but in the quiet understanding that passed between us. We needed to get me out of the house. We needed to give them the opportunity, the time, the privacy they thought they wanted. It was Marcus who thought of the excuse. "There's that baking convention in Atlanta next week," he said, his voice casual, as if we were discussing the weather. "The big one. You should go. Tell him you have to meet with a new supplier." It was perfect. A believable reason for me to be gone overnight. Samuel wouldn't question it. He would be relieved. Then Marcus thought of something else. Something I never would have. "Our security camera," he said, pointing toward the small device aimed at our front door. It records everything. We need to make sure it doesn't see her come in. He was already thinking like a strategist, covering our tracks, erasing the evidence. That night, he quietly logged into the system and set the front door camera to have a system malfunction for a 24-hour period. Just a random glitch. Nothing to arouse suspicion. We sat there in the low light of my kitchen. The smell of stale coffee in the air. We didn't talk about our pain. We didn't talk about our broken hearts. We talked about logistics. We talked about timing. We built the trap, piece by piece. And as I looked at my son, at the hard set of his jaw and the cold fire in his eyes, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow. I was proud of his strength, proud of his loyalty, but I was so sorry. I was sorry that the world had forced my good, kind son to learn the art of war in his own mother's kitchen. Number 5. The stage is set. The night before the performance, I barely slept. I lay beside Robert, feeling the warmth of his body next to mine. A warmth that now felt like a lie. Every time he shifted in his sleep, every soft snore that escaped his lips, my heart would hammer against my ribs. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying every step of the plan, searching for flaws, for holes, for any chance of failure. There was no room for error, none. The next morning, I was up before the dawn, just as I had been for 40 years. But I didn't go to the bakery. Today was different. Today, I had a different kind of recipe to follow. Robert was still asleep. The house was quiet, filled with the soft, gray light of early morning. I moved like a shadow. I pulled on a pair of thin, disposable gloves, the same kind I used for kneading sticky dough. My hands felt steady. My purpose felt clear. I took his car keys from the little ceramic bowl by the door. The metal felt cold, impersonal. I slipped out into the humid air of the garage. His car sat there, a silent, unknowing accomplice. I opened the passenger door, the faint scent of Jessica's cheap, flowery perfume still lingering in the air, a scent of betrayal. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm now, a drumbeat counting down to the final act. I opened the glove box, and there it was, the small, white tube, a monument to their deceit. My fingers, protected by the thin layer of latex, closed around it. For a moment, I just held it, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It felt heavier than it should have. It was heavy with lies, heavy with disrespect. I felt a surge of nausea, a deep, visceral disgust. This object, this filth, had been a part of their secret world, a world built on the ruins of my trust. I took a deep breath. I pulled the tube of Krazy glue from my apron pocket. It was cold and hard, a tool of industry, not intimacy. The two tubes looked almost identical in the dim light, a perfect swap. I unscrewed the cap of the lubricant and, without looking at it, dropped it into a small plastic bag I had brought with me. It felt like handling evidence from a crime scene. Then, I placed the tube of Krazy glue in its place, tucking it behind the car's manual. Just so. It looked innocent. It looked right. I closed the glove box. The click echoed in the silent garage. It was done. I went back inside, disposing of the gloves and the evidence in the bottom of the kitchen trash, burying it beneath coffee grounds and eggshells. I washed my hands at the sink, scrubbing until my skin was raw. I needed to feel clean again. An hour later, Robert came downstairs, yawning. He was already dressed in his golf shirt, ready for a day he thought would be his own. I was in the kitchen, packing a small overnight bag. My movements were calm, measured. I was an actress playing the part of a dutiful wife. "Morning," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "You're up and about early. I have to get to Atlanta," I said, not looking at him. I folded a blouse with careful, precise movements. "The convention starts this afternoon. I told you about it last week." "Ah. Right. The bakery thing," he said, his voice casual, too casual. "Big trip for you." I zipped the bag and finally turned to face him. I looked at my husband of 40 years, the man I had shared my life with, and I searched his eyes. I was looking for a flicker of guilt, a shadow of remorse. Anything. There was nothing. There was only relief. A subtle but unmistakable lightness in his expression. He was relieved that I was leaving. He was already planning his day, his evening, with her. In my house, in my bed, that was the moment I knew I felt nothing for him anymore. Not love. Not even hate. Just a hollow space. An emptiness where a lifetime of shared memories used to be. The man I had married was gone. This person standing in front of me was a stranger. An imposter wearing his face. Well, he said, taking a sip of his coffee. You be careful on the road. Call me when you get there. I will, I said, my voice even. A perfect performance. I picked up my bag. I walked to the door. I could feel his eyes on my back. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. This was it. The last time I would ever stand in this house as his wife. The last words we would ever speak in our old life. Robert, I said, turning slightly. Yeah, don't burn the house down while I'm gone. A small, genuine laugh escaped his lips. Don't worry, Evelyn, he said, smiling. I'll be on my best behavior. I watched him smile, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He had no idea what was coming. He had no idea the stage was set. The curtain was about to rise, and he was the star of a tragedy he had written himself. I walked out the door without looking back. I got into my car, but I didn't drive towards the interstate. I didn't drive towards Atlanta. I drove one street over, turned the corner, and parked in front of Mrs. Gable's house. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and walked up her front path. I knocked on her door, ready to ask for a cup of tea, a comfortable chair, and a front row seat to the final act, ready to watch the whole thing burn. Number 6, the curtain rises. I sat in the dark. Mrs. Peterson had drawn the floral curtains in her living room, leaving just a sliver of a gap for me to look through. She was a good neighbor, a good friend. She didn't ask questions. She just made me a cup of peppermint tea, placed it on the end table beside me, and left me to my vigil. The tea went cold, untouched. My hands were resting in my lap. Calm, so calm, outside. The sun was beginning to set. It cast long, lazy shadows across my lawn, making the familiar shapes of my rose bushes look like crouching animals. The world was winding down for the evening. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A screen door slammed. Everything was normal, so terribly normal. Every tick of the grandfather clock in Mrs. Peterson's hallway felt like a drumbeat. It was counting down the seconds. To what? I wasn't sure. Victory, destruction. Maybe they were the same thing. My anger was gone. My sorrow was gone. They had burned away, leaving behind something clean and hard. A single, sharp point of focus. I felt like a hunter in a blind, waiting, motionless, patient. My whole world had shrunk to the view through that narrow gap in the curtains, to the front of my house. The house with the bright yellow door. The minutes stretched into an hour, then another. I didn't move. I just watched. I watched as Mr. Henderson next door brought in his trash can. I watched as the Miller children rode their bicycles back and forth, their laughter carrying on the warm evening air. Life was going on, all around me. But my life was paused, holding its breath. And then, I saw it. A car pulled up to the curb in front of my house. A nondescript, gray sedan. An Uber. The back door opened, and she got out. Tiffany. She was wearing a simple dress. Not her usual flashy style. She had a large scarf wrapped around her head and wore sunglasses. Even though the sun was nearly gone, a pathetic disguise. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. She looked over her shoulder. Once. Twice. Her movements were quick, skittish. She looked like a thief. And in a way, she was. She had come to steal my home. My life. Before she could even take a step up the walkway, my front door opened. The yellow door. Samuel was standing there, silhouetted against the warm light of the hallway. He didn't step out. He just opened the door enough for her to slip through. He craned his neck, looking up and down our quiet street. A quick, guilty motion. Their eyes never met. He just grabbed her by the arm and pulled her inside. The yellow door clicked shut, and then there was only silence. They were in there, in my house, in my bed. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now, all there was to do was wait for the spring. The grandfather clock ticked on. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Each tick was a hammer blow against the silence. My body felt disconnected from my mind. I was a statue, carved from waiting. I could feel my own heartbeat, a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. Thump, 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 thump. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. A soft buzz against my leg. I didn't flinch. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled it out. The screen lit up the darkness around me. The name on the screen was Marcus's. I pressed the green button and brought the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. I just listened. I could hear the faint crackle of the connection, the sound of his breathing. He was waiting, too. Somewhere in the city, in the fire station. He was on his own vigil. Finally, his voice came. It was low, tense. Just 4 words. Mom. Are you okay? I looked out the window. At the dark, silent house across the street. A house that was no longer my home. It was a stage. And the final act was about to begin. I took a slow breath. My voice, when I answered, was as steady as my hands. I will be. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I settled back into the armchair, my eyes fixed on the house. The waiting was almost over. I could feel it. A subtle shift in the air. A tension building. The curtain had risen, and the play was now in motion. Number 7, the 911 call. For a long time, there was only silence. A heavy, humid silence that felt louder than any sound. I sat in Mrs. Gable's floral armchair, the ticking of her grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out the moments of my life's demolition. I imagined the scene playing out across the street. The discovery. The confusion turning to dawning horror. The panic. I wondered which one of them had noticed it first. I wondered if there was a moment of disbelief. A futile struggle. Before the awful, sticky truth set in. The crazy glue, it doesn't let go. My son had been right about that. Then, the quiet was broken. It started as a faint cry in the distance. A single, lonely note that sliced through the afternoon calm. It grew steadily louder. A rising crescendo of panic. A siren. My teacup rattled in its saucer. Mrs. Gable, who had been pretending to read her magazine, looked up, her eyes wide. Goodness me, she murmured. Sounds like it's getting closer. Oh, it was getting closer. It was coming for them. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, who had made that call. I pictured Robert, or maybe Jessica, fumbling for a phone in their moment of sheer, abject terror. I imagined the humiliating conversation with the 911 operator. What is your emergency times? What could they even say times? We have a situation. We're stuck. Asterisk. The thought was so absurd. So pathetic. A hysterical laugh almost bubbled up in my throat. They had walked into my trap. And now they were calling for the world to come and see. First came the ambulance. Its lights flashing, a frantic, the silent rhythm of red and white against the oak trees. It turned onto our street, its siren blaring, and slowed to a stop right in front of my house. My house. Neighbors started to appear on their porches, drawn out by the drama. Their curiosity was a tangible thing, an energy that buzzed in the air. And then, I heard another siren, a deeper, more powerful one. My heart seized in my chest. It was the fire engine. It lumbered around the corner, a giant red machine of rescue and authority, and parked right behind the ambulance. Engine 2. James's engine. I stopped breathing. This was the part of the plan I had not been able to fully imagine. The part that felt like twisting a knife in my own heart. The truck doors opened, and the firefighters jumped down, their movements efficient and practiced. And leading them, his face set in a grim, professional mask, was my son. My James. He was wearing his captain's helmet, his heavy coat making his shoulders seem even broader. He looked so strong, so capable, and so utterly unprepared for what he was about to find. My carefully constructed calm began to crumble. This was no longer just about Robert and Jessica. This was about my son. What had I done to him? I had set a stage for his deepest humiliation, forcing him to confront the wreckage of his life in front of the men he led, the men who looked up to him. I watched him stride towards the front door, conferring with the paramedics. I could see the confusion on their faces. There was no fire, no smoke, just a call for a medical assist. My teacup was shaking violently now. A part of me wanted to run across the street, to scream at them to stop, to turn back, but I was frozen. I was the architect of this moment. And now I was nothing more than a spectator, a coward, hiding behind my neighbor's curtain. The paramedics went inside first. Then I saw James and another firefighter follow them in. The door closed, and once again, there was silence, broken only by the crackle of the radios and the low hum of the engines. The neighbors were a small crowd now, clustered on the sidewalk, their whispers weaving a tapestry of speculation. What's going on? I don't see any smoke. It's the Brooks house. Evelyn's supposed to be out of town. The words floated across the street, distant and meaningless. My entire universe was contained within that house. Inside, my son was discovering a truth so ugly it would stain the rest of his life. He was seeing his father, the man who taught him to ride a bike, and his wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, in a state of utter degradation. My son, my brave boy, had to walk in there and witness the wreckage of our family. I sat there, hidden in the shadows, a coward. But I know some of you understand this journey. If you are still listening, if you are still here with me, please, just comment the number 1 below. I need to know that I am not alone in this, that there are friends walking this path with me. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell you the final part of this story. Number 8. The spectacle. The front door of my house opened. The bright yellow paint seemed to mock the scene that was about to unfold. It was no longer a door to a home. It was the entrance to a stage, and the main performance was beginning. 2 paramedics came out first. Walking backward, they were pulling a stretcher, and on it, under a single white sheet, was the grotesque centerpiece of my little drama. It wasn't a body. It was a shape, a lumpy, awkward shape that moved with a pained, unified rhythm. It was a knot of limbs and shame. The sheet was thin, too thin. You could see the outline of 2 heads, one turned away, the other buried in a pillow of fabric. You could see the tangled mess of 4 arms, 4 legs, all hopelessly fused together. A wave of sound rippled through the crowd of neighbors. It started as a collective gasp, a sharp intake of breath from 20 different lawns. Then it morphed into a chorus of whispers, hushed, excited whispers that spread like fire through dry grass. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel them. Judgment, disbelief, a delicious, scandalous thrill. I saw Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down raise her phone, the little red light of its camera glowing in the twilight. Then another phone went up, and another, little digital eyes, all capturing this moment, this permanent, public humiliation. The paramedics navigated the stretcher down the porch steps with a practiced, weary professionalism. With every little jostle, a muffled cry of pain would escape from beneath the sheet. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of consequence. They had turned my marital bed into a place of betrayal, and now it had become their public prison. I watched Samuel's face for a moment when the sheet slipped. Just a glimpse. His skin was pale, clammy with sweat under the flashing emergency lights. His eyes were wide with a terror that had nothing to do with physical pain. It was the terror of being seen, truly seen. The respectable, retired businessman, Samuel Brooks, was gone. In his place was just this pathetic, trapped creature. And Tiffany, I only saw her hair, a tangled blonde mess spilling out from under the sheet. She was the one making most of the noise. Little whimpering sobs that were lost in the ambient noise of the engines and the whispering crowd. The people I had known for 30 years, The people who had borrowed cups of sugar and waved to Samuel every morning as he left for work, they looked at him now with a new kind of expression. It wasn't sympathy. It was a cold, morbid fascination. The kind of look you give a strange animal you find on the side of the road. He was no longer one of them. He had become a spectacle. Through it all, my son, Marcus, stood by the fire engine. He didn't watch the stretcher as it was loaded into the back of the ambulance. He didn't look at the neighbors. He stood with his back to the scene, his shoulders rigid in his heavy coat. He was directing his men, his voice calm, and even as he gave orders to secure the house, he was the picture of professionalism, a captain in full control of his ship. But I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. I could see the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He was holding himself together with sheer force of will. He was building a wall around his own heart, brick by painful brick. The ambulance doors slammed shut, a sound of finality. It was done. The sirens started up, a low whoop that grew into a full-throated cry as it pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street, carrying my husband and my daughter-in-law away into the darkness. The show was over. The crowd began to break apart, their phones now lowered, their voices rising as they began to dissect what they had just witnessed. They would talk about this night at church potlucks and grocery store aisles for years to come. The story would become a local legend, a cautionary tale. The night the Brooks family came undone, the fire engine started to back out of my driveway, its big tires crushing my azaleas one last time. The flashing lights swept across the houses, casting long, dancing shadows. Marcus remained. He stood alone in the middle of my lawn as the fire engine pulled away, its red lights shrinking in the distance. The street was quiet again, save for the lingering murmur of the neighbors. He stood there for a long moment, a solitary figure in the sudden darkness. Then, he lifted his head. He turned, and he looked directly across the street. He looked right through the sliver in Mrs. Peterson's curtains. His eyes found mine. There was no victory in his gaze. There was no satisfaction. There was only a vast, desolate ocean of pain, an abyss of loss that I had created, that we had created together, in that one look. He asked me a question that had no answer. He asked me, asterisk, was it worth it? Mom, asterisk. I didn't have an answer for him. I just sat there in the dark, the cold cup of tea in front of me. And for the first time that night, I felt my hands begin to shake. Number 9, the aftermath. The storm, when it breaks, is loud and violent. But the silence that comes after, that's a different thing altogether. It's a heavy, weighted quiet, filled with the ghosts of what used to be. In the weeks that followed that awful afternoon, our lives were lived in that quiet. The story, of course, was everywhere. It was the whisper in the grocery store aisle, the poorly hidden smirk from a teller at the bank, the headline in the local gossip blog that called it the sticky situation. Robert and Jessica became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties. They were a joke. After being discharged from the hospital, they simply vanished. I heard Robert went to stay with his sister in Florida. Jessica, I imagine, ran as far and as fast as she could. They were phantoms now, haunting a life that was no longer mine. The day after the incident, James moved back home. He didn't bring much, just a single duffel bag and a silence so profound it seemed to absorb all the sound in the house. For a week, we moved around each other like strangers, the unspoken horror of what we had done and what we had witnessed hanging in the air between us. We didn't talk about it. We couldn't. The words were too sharp, too heavy to lift. Instead, we worked. He started coming to the bakery with me in the mornings. He'd arrive in the pre-dawn darkness, his face tired, and he would just start doing things. He'd mop the floors. He'd lift the heavy sacks of flour that were getting harder for me to manage. He'd sit at the front counter, organizing receipts into neat piles, his large, capable hands moving with a quiet purpose. He was building a new routine, a new wall of normalcy to keep the chaos at bay, and I let him. I needed him there. His quiet presence was an anchor in the swirling waters of my new life. My lawyer's name was Mrs. Davies, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, not related to the investigator, just a coincidence that felt like fate. We met in her mahogany-paneled office. I brought the audio file. She listened to the whole thing through her headphones, her expression never changing. When it was over, she took the headphones off and looked at me. "Well, Mrs. Brooks," she said, her voice calm and even. "This simplifies things. Robert, through his own lawyer, tried to fight. He tried to claim half of everything, half the house, half the savings, half of my bakery. He said his 40 years of marriage entitled him to it. 40 years of lies. 40 years of quiet betrayal that had almost culminated in the theft of my entire life. I didn't have to say a word in court. Mrs. Davies played the recording. The sound of Robert's voice, my husband's voice, filled the sterile courtroom, weaving a tale of greed and deception. The judge's face was a mask of stone. I didn't take half. I took it all. The house that was paid for with bakery profits. The savings I had built, penny by penny. And my business. My soul, Martha's sweet soul, was mine. Free and clear. My bakery was built on my sweat and my tears. Not his lies. He was left with nothing but his shame. It was a victory. But it felt hollow. A legal triumph couldn't mend a broken family. It couldn't erase the image of my son's face under those flashing red and blue lights. One night, about a month after, James and I were closing up the bakery. We were working in comfortable silence, wiping down the counters, the air thick with the smell of sugar and yeast. He stopped, a damp cloth in his hand, and looked at me. It was the first time he had really looked at me, truly met my eyes. Since that day, "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, almost rough with disuse, "I don't regret what we did. I held my breath. I only regret that we had to." He finished. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped my eye and rolled down my cheek. I hadn't cried since that day I heard the recording. He stepped forward and wrapped his strong arms around me, and I leaned into him. My son, my anchor. We stood there for a long time, two broken people holding each other together. The healing had begun. At first, the bakery was quiet. Some customers stayed away, embarrassed or unsure of what to say. The little bell over the door, which used to jingle all day long, was sometimes silent for an hour at a time. I started to worry. I wondered if the scandal had tainted my business, if the stench of my family's drama had seeped into the very walls of the place I loved. But then, slowly, things began to change. Mrs. Gable was the first. She came in and ordered a dozen sweet potato biscuits, her smile warmer than ever. Then a few more of the old regulars started to trickle back. And then, new faces began to appear. Women, mostly. Women my age. They would come in, order a coffee and a slice of pie, and they would look at me with a silent, knowing, understanding. They didn't come for the gossip. They came for the solidarity. They came to support the woman who had refused to be a victim. They came to support Martha's sweet soul, which had become something more than just a bakery. It had become a symbol of resilience. The bell started jingling again, louder and more often than ever before. My son was at the register, taking orders, with a small, hesitant smile, and I was in the back, my hands covered in flour, doing what I had always done. I was baking. I was surviving. I was beginning again. Number 10, the lesson in the flour. It's morning again, here, in my bakery. The morning always smells the same. It smells of yeast and warm sugar, of melting butter and possibility. The sun streams through the big front window, catching the little motes of flour that dance in the air like tiny, happy ghosts. For the first time in a long, long time, the light doesn't just illuminate the room. I can feel it warming my skin. My hands are buried in a mountain of dough on the big wooden table. The surface is cool and smooth beneath my palms. I don't need to think about what I'm doing. My hands know this rhythm. It's a rhythm they have practiced for over 40 years. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. It's a meditation, a prayer in motion. The dough yields under the pressure of my hands, then springs back, full of life. It's honest. You can't lie to dough. It knows if you're distracted. If your heart isn't in it, it will refuse to rise for you. It will be tough and unforgiving. For 40 years, I poured my love into this dough. I worked into it my hopes for my son, my dreams for our future, the quiet, steady affection I had for my husband. The bakery was built on that love. Then, for a short, dark time, I poured my rage into it. My hands were hard, unforgiving. I punched the dough down with a fury that came from a place of deep betrayal. And the bread I made then, it was still good. But it was different. It had a harder crust. It was missing a certain warmth. Now I just pour myself. My hands push, fold, and turn. And I am simply Martha, not a wife, not a victim, not an avenger, just a 63-year-old woman with flour on her apron and a business to run. I thought my story was about revenge. For a while, that's what kept me going. The fire of it. The sharp, satisfying focus of planning their downfall. But revenge is a fire that burns you as much as it burns them. It leaves you standing in the ashes of your own life, wondering what to do next. It's a hollow victory. My story, I realize now, is about resilience. It's about what you do after the sirens have faded and the neighbors have stopped whispering. It's about sweeping up the broken pieces of your life and seeing if you can build something new, something stronger. I've learned that a family is not just about blood or a marriage certificate. That's just the paperwork. A real family. It's about who stands with you when the walls come crashing down. It's about who is willing to sit with you in the dark and wait for the morning to come. I lost a husband, the man I thought was my husband. He had been gone for a long time before that night. I was just the last one to know it. But I found my son again, not the fire captain, not the dutiful son who called every Sunday. I found Marcus, the boy with the sad eyes and the strong heart. We found each other in the wreckage. We are kidder now, the two of us. We don't talk about that night. We don't have to. The understanding is there in the easy silence between us, in the way he makes sure the coffee is ready for me in the morning, in the way I save him the corner piece of the cinnamon loaf, his favorite. We are rebuilding, one quiet day at a time. And most importantly, after 40 years of being Samuel's wife, of having my name always attached to his phasers, like an afterthought, I finally found Martha. She was here all along, buried under years of duty and expectation. She has strong hands and a steady heart. She knows how to create something beautiful out of simple things like flour and water and heat. She is a survivor. I like her. I think I'm going to spend some time getting to know her better. The little bell above the bakery door jingles, pulling me from my thoughts. Marcus walks in, a real smile on his face, the kind that reaches his eyes. The light is back. It's a different light, more knowing, more cautious, but it's there. Morning, Mom, he says, grabbing one of the clean white aprons from the hook on the wall. Smells good in here. He ties the apron around his waist and comes to stand beside me at the big table. He sprinkles some flour on his hands and takes a piece of the dough. I watch him as he begins to work it. His movements clumsy at first, then more confident as he mimics mine. Push, fold, turn. The sun fills the room, and together, in the quiet, warm, sweet-smelling air of the morning, we begin again. From a woman who poured her soul into her dough, to a survivor who refused to crumble, Robert and Jessica tried to take everything from me. But they failed. I kept my bakery. I kept my son. And most importantly, after all those years, I finally kept a piece of myself. For myself. Did you enjoy my story? I'd love to know which city or which part of the world you're listening from today. Let's meet in the comments and share our stories. If this story touched your heart, you can support me by sending a super thanks. It helps me continue to bring more true life tales like this one to you. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for your sweet and loyal support. I am so looking forward to reading your thoughts on what we shared today. On the screen right now, you'll see 2 more life stories that I think you'll love. There is so much more to discover on my channel. Please, don't forget to subscribe. Dipu Cater. I will see you in the next life story. With love and respect.